Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties episode 10 for season 5. My name is Lee. I'm joined by my regular co-conspirators Vickers and Zeev, who are over in the East Coast.
We say co-conspirators because thought crime is a thing.
Yeah. Always. Okay. And we don't like thought criminals around here. So,
I don't know about you, I commit thought crimes regularly. In fact, I'm committing them right now.
Yeah, probably. Sedition forever. So we're going to talk about Bill Shorten, tax Bill Shorten, cracking down on those terrible retirees with their money and the lack of taxes and
pensioners
and
too.
pensioners. Yeah. So going after pensioners. We're also going to talk about
his political acumen is just well,
Look. To be fair, I think we don't. I don't think we give enough credit for Bill Shorten's actual position. You see. We're all going to go into the mind of Bill Shorten here for a second.
Yes, right.
Now, imagine you are the Labour leader, right? You are the stalwart for the working class. You have a lot of money that you need to find, right? And people very selfishly don't give it to you willingly, right? So you need to you need to take it from them. Because they're just holding on to it because you are a way better manager of that money than they ever could be. And when you start when you finally understand where he's coming from, you will accept that the Labour government is the only government in Australia that has a better idea of aggregate demand than anyone else here.
Bill's just disappointed he can't go around whacking people with a stick like pinatas looking for money. Just keep whacking people like cash just spills out and just walk up to Gina Reinhardt and whack her in the belly and pick up all the 50s that come out.
We were talking about GTA 4 earlier and I'm just like...
Yeah.
I can
run them over and pick up the money that's floating over their dead bodies. So for those who haven't been aware of what's going on, basically Bill Shorten has decided to have a go at the way dividend imputation works. So we'll try to avoid the complications, but essentially when companies pay corporate tax, they can they can give a franking credit to their Australian shareholders. And if you earn, you pay less tax than the corporate rate. So if you basically earn less than $37,000 a year, you will get a refund because you're only paying 19% tax versus the 30% of the rate. So essentially, if you own shares and you have a low taxable income, you get a little bit back from the ATO in the form of essentially that corporate tax being refunded to you. Now, Bill Shorten wants to go after this dividend imputation system. He wants to get rid of the refunds, which affects anybody who has shares, but particularly those who have pensions or have some sort of basically retired people, pensioners and people in self-managed retirement super funds who receive income through their shares in the form of these refunds. So essentially, they're hoping to get $5 billion worth of tax from scrapping these refunds.
Yep, and to add to that, the way it works is if you're earning a wage or a salary or what have you, and you have a taxable income and you're paying tax, then and on top of that you've got shares and those shares are franked. Those shares come with dividends and the dividends are issued and they're franked. Then you will continue to get a franking credit. The people who are affected by this are people whose income is below the marginal, is below the threshold to pay tax. So that's below 19,000.
No, because if you're at the 19% rate, you'll still get a refund, just not as big as if you earned below 18,000.
Yep.
So
below, so either you're below 19, or you're a retiree living on your superannuation, and you're a self-managed super fund retiree that owns shares, and those are paying you income. That would be tax-free income regardless. And in those two scenarios, either you're very poor, you're a pensioner basically, but you own some shares and they're giving you a dividend and that's what you earn, or on the flip side, you're reasonably well established and you've got a self-managed super fund and you're earning tax-free dividend income. In both of those scenarios, Bill Shorten is saying, nope, you don't get the franking credit. Effectively, you're paying 30% tax on your corporate...
basically on corporate income.
On your dividend income.
Yeah.
Your dividend income. You're not paying it directly to the ATO. The ATO is taking it from the company, but it's on your account.
Yep.
Okay.
So what I was going to say is the interesting thing about this policy is the immediate consequence of this, because they're not targeting poor people, right? Even though these are technically poor people because they've got a low yearly income, it's because they're living off the interest on their principal, right? That's actually quite a large or quite a large principal investment, right? It's a quite large investment to get that $30,000 or $40,000.
To get thousands of dollars of dividend income, you would need to have
Millions.
a substantial amount of shares.
Yeah.
Thousands of dollars. I don't know if you'd need, millions of shares. Oh, I wouldn't go that far, but
it depends on the share. But you would,
the share.
Yeah, you would need. Okay, let's assume it's
a sizable share portfolio.
Assuming 12% return, which is a really, really good return, right? So double the government rate. You would need at least $400,000 to get to that, to get to 37,000.
That's
right.
Yeah, so you need to be pretty asset rich. To get there.
Asset rich. So I'm not saying that these are poor people because of that income that they're earning. I'm saying the principal investment amount is actually quite large. So in that situation, there is a very, very, very strong incentive for these retirees to effectively offshore their investments, right? And run it through trusts out of Singapore, paying income back to themselves, right? Because the income, and then because it's coming back as an income, then they do get the refund as they normally would. So
simply because they don't reach, because it's ordinary income and it doesn't reach the taxable threshold, because they're saying, well, if it's ordinary income, it doesn't reach the taxable threshold, that means they don't pay tax. And
exactly.
That's allowed. But on the other hand, if you don't structure your arrangements in that complex way, if you just own shares directly in Australia, you pay tax. So you can see how Vickers is pointing to a strange issue, which basically...
It's an incentive structure to move your retirement fund to Singapore. And if anyone's listening to this and hasn't... and doesn't have that and hasn't figured that out yet, sorry, yes, I had to put it out there, but I'm pretty sure if you talk to your financial planner, they'll be saying either Singapore, Hong Kong, or somewhere else that's a tax-friendly jurisdiction that has a double tax arrangement with Australia. So I don't know where he thinks he's going to get $5.6 billion. I think he's actually going to create a bigger deficit as a result of that.
Yeah, well, especially when you start talking about...
There will definitely be offshoring because people will... I mean, the other point to mention is the fact of the matter is that even if you don't go through that complex arrangement, it will just be now more economical to invest in overseas shares as opposed to Australian shares, simply because there's no more dividend imputation for Australian shares. So economically, the trade-offs are leaning towards foreign shares, for example.
Hell, you don't even need...
Well, maybe...
Hell, you don't even... Actually, I just realized you don't even need to go to Singapore. You can literally pop across the ditch, right, across to New Zealand. We have a very good double taxing arrangement with them, right? You can invest in Australian shares, and they still provide dividend credits anyway. So,
okay, so two things. Firstly, for the sake of any
and they
future
pick up the money.
issues,
and they pick up the money.
Get your financial advice from actual financial advisors.
Don't
take anything on this program as actual financial advice.
Absolutely, don't. Seek your own financial advice.
The lawyer podcast. But secondly, I mean, I don't know if this would drive every single person out of the Australian share market.
No, it won't. But it's a marginal effect.
Sure, it's a marginal thing. And the third thing is also, I mean, Bill Shorten today this is the article which is in the Sydney Morning Herald, which I'm reading from. It says Bill Shorten has pledged to compensate up to 250,000 pensioners for any dollar they lose under his imputation policy. So
so let me get this straight. He changes it, and the people that are going to be affected get reimbursed.
Yes. So the
notion
is
why
quantify?
How does that
ridiculous?
How does that get quantified? Even I mean, how do they quantify this reimbursement exactly? What is it against? Is it
Against previous earnings, or is it against future earnings? I mean, it could very easily just be used to cover losses.
Maybe. It's difficult to quantify. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm scratching my head thinking, how is he going to work that out? And do the rest of the part pensioners, they don't get that? That's going to create some interesting political dynamics.
He said to Channel 9 they're going to have a marginal change and their part pension goes up as a result. So it looks like essentially there'll be increases in the pension to theoretically cover the cost. But the thing is, not every part pensioner is going to be caught up in this. They're going to have other forms of income or whatever. Yeah. And there's a lot of part pensioners. Like there's probably more part pensioners than there are people. Like the people who are affected by this will be a subset of part pensioners. So,
and assuming that it's an aggregate,
might end up spending more than he's actually getting back in retaining the income.
Firstly, that's an aggregate handout, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of the points, and the thing is, some of the people that get hit harder, right, by this change, won't necessarily be compensated every dollar back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, look, there's, like I said, there's this. As far as I can tell, there's a strong incentive that it's giving to not invest in Australia. Simultaneously, I mean, I'm trying to think, like, even foreign direct investments are going to be affected by this.
Yeah.
Like there is, like, I'm just like, there is no incentive. Think about it. If you're a foreign direct investor, you'll want to open up a shop in Australia, right? So that you can collect those franking credits here in your Australian subsidiary, right?
Yeah.
But if you can't, right?
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Yeah, but they're not
I don't
abolishing
know if
franking
you would
credits,
open
though.
a
That's
shop
the
just for the right reason, but okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're not
Go
abolishing franking credits, though. So
that's a good point.
It's just the refund.
That's a good point.
So it's really
It's
only
just for the refund.
Australian shareholders.
The refund
it's Australian
only for those,
individuals who have a tax rate who's lower.
So scratch that.
Yeah.
So scratch.
So I think the bigger impact is, say this goes through the day after, or if it's looking like it's going to go through Parliament, whenever that happens, the stock market's going to take out absolutely hammering because pensioners are going to start bailing on, and we have literally trillions of dollars tied up in superannuation.
I'm not quite sure how many pensioners have stock tied up in this area.
No, but he has a point.
But he has a point. The stock market will take a hit, but I don't know if it will be a massive hit or a marginal hit or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it'll be noticeable, but I don't know if it'll be a massive hit.
I don't think it'll be permanent either. I think you're right. It is going to take a bit of a hit, but I think a lot of it will be based on the expectation that it's going to take a hit, and the actual hit itself might not be as large as people think.
Yeah.
And as the market adjusts itself, I don't think it'll. Because, as much as I say, there's a strong incentive for people to do that, I just realized I'm also talking about some of the most financially stubborn people in the world, right? They made their investments and they're just hoping to coast on them.
So, I mean, I actually, if I understand from my taxation unit, which I'm currently doing right, I'm pretty sure that even pension funds benefit from this policy.
Yes.
So you're not just talking about every individual self-managed super fund. You're talking about the entire superannuation system has in some way tied up in this. Because most people who are going to retire are going to not have ordinary income. They're not going to be working. By that very nature, they're retired, so they're not working. So almost everybody in some way is affected in this way. So even if you are just invested in a superannuation fund, they are receiving those credits on they're receiving those refunds on your behalf. I'm pretty sure. So,
which kind of complicates things for those providers because they now need to look at it. Adds a bit of compliance cost for them because they now need to look at what your taxable income would otherwise be. Check that you're not going to get any
reimbursement,
any reimbursement at all otherwise, and ensure that happens just so that they properly apply for the credit and receive it and are entitled to it on your behalf. That's a bit of complication there.
It's not really. I mean, essentially, so the way it works out is essentially when they're doing all their, their end of year, sort of income related things. It just essentially they will get less back.
They'll add another line item.
Yeah, so it just essentially is that income will just disappear from their books. But the thing is,
I'm saying it adds another layer of red tape for them to comply with.
Yeah, a little bit. They don't actually have to technically. They technically apply for the refund. They essentially receive the refund when you do your taxes because the way it works out. So, but I mean, so that's less of an issue. But I think
quite right.
Actually, you're talking about large institutional investors who are going to start looking elsewhere for income because that's their job. Like their job is to get the best return they can for their members or for the people in there who.
And it's an income hit for them too.
Yeah, well,
because it means they get a percentage of that income, and suddenly they're getting less.
Yes,
so
they're going to start
if
looking.
Our superannuation companies, if some of them weren't so perhaps strongly affiliated with the labour movement, we might even see a campaign by the superannuation funds against this. Maybe some of the private ones,
you'd hope they
not
would.
affiliated with the labour union movement, might start pushing back. We hope.
Maybe.
We live to hope.
Maybe, but keep in mind, I think that he pushed this out because Labor currently has not in the two-party between preferred prime ministers, but in every other aspect of the polling, Labor is so far ahead.
3%. Right? That's the consistent number.
Yeah. 3% is pretty much
347. Well, that's a win.
Yeah, 3%'s a very comfortable win. 5%'s a landslide. So yeah. So I mean, and it's been consistent. They've won the last 30 polls. So they're pretty much of the opinion that they're in the same position that Tony Abbott was in, and they've decided to use that opportunity to push some of their more radical agenda out early. But the funny thing is, some of these I think are serious missteps, and I think while the polling might suggest that they're comfortably in the lead, I think that they're comfortably in the lead because people don't like the way the Liberals are doing things. But I think when push comes to shove, and it's going to be, hey, there's a real chance that we're going to elect Bill Shorten. Does everyone remember those stuff-ups that he made? I think people might hesitate to vote that way.
I mean, if the Liberals take the time to remind them. And if they actually follow through and provide some kind of counter-argument or agenda. I think
I think largely
the policies don't speak for themselves. That's all I'm saying, because only the news obsessives like us, and maybe some of these part pensioners, if their accountants are doing their jobs right, or if they read the papers, some of the people will get this. All I'm saying, some of them won't, and they need the Liberal Party messaging. That's all I'm saying. They need the messaging out there.
So my gut feeling on this isn't about messaging at all, because if you actually grab, or rather even look at like the random punters out on who feature in those, we ask the people around what they think of Bill Shorten, the predominant theme that you see coming about Bill Shorten is that he's untrustworthy, that people just don't trust him, and that seems to be a pretty common perception. Now, I think if you go into the policy sort of thing, and people who pay attention to policy and all of that stuff, people might actually lean towards Labor because people like the idea of give me that, right? Or give me's. They like that idea. Rather, that's the predominant prevailing line of thought in the Australian subculture. And I actually suspect it's going to go the other way, and based on that untrustworthiness, I think that's what's going to come back and bite them in the ass.
Well,
so my take is...
It might, but my response is it needs to be messaged. It can't just happen on its own. Anyway.
The thing is, it's a year to go, at least. Probably till the next election. So this is a policy that's been announced way ahead of schedule. It's effectively going to impact every single baby boomer, which is the biggest demographic by far. I think, there's going to be large groups, basically the entire superannuation industry has an incentive in arguing against this thing, and we're talking about trillions of dollars. So, I mean, I think the possibility of Shorten dumping this policy is probably not
in the next week.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, because it's only going to get worse. It's going to get worse once people actually start really analysing the fact that he's trying to get back $5 billion. They're trying to collect $5 billion in taxes, but then he's going to compensate with part pension increases, which is going to cost billions of dollars on their own. I think it's just going to fall apart, and it would just get scrapped because they want to win, and why would they risk their 6-point lead with the policy that's not even going to make them money?
Actually, it might
I
just
don't
end
know.
up getting. They might never mention it again because they've done that several times.
Sure.
To be perfectly honest, they don't necessarily walk away from policies. They are banking quite heavily on the fact that the government is just fucking incompetent as
Yes.
shit.
Yeah.
And that, to be
They've-
fair,
they've
to
never-
be fair,
yeah.
to be fair, I have a lot of respect for Turnbull because he seems to be reasonable at holding his party together, right? But I can count on my hand the number of Liberals who are elected currently who are competent at their job,
Yes.
right?
Can
I'm kidding.
also add to
There
this?
is a number less than 5, is what
Yes.
I'll tell you.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Can I add to this? I mean, the last I mean, in saying that the Labor Party will drop it because it's bad policy or something, it will need to take sustained, heated, and ongoing flack in the media to even think about dropping it, and it will have to be much more than what we've seen for now, which is just the beginning of hopefully a sustained, ongoing thing. Absent that, I mean, look at the trucking industry. I mean, people were literally killing themselves because their businesses were being put in at an end. A few people, at any rate, and they didn't care. I mean, they didn't care about ending the self-employed truckies. What are they going to care about some other small segment of
Yeah,
the
but when you're
population?
talking about this is not a small segment. This is essentially every boomer, and that's
Yeah,
still the
okay.
biggest demographic.
They need to find a voice. They need to organise. All of these things need
Sure.
to happen. They need to really wallop these people, and
Yeah.
I don't see it yet. It could happen, but I don't see it yet. Yeah.
Yep. No, fair.
But-
fair
but
point.
you have to
And with that,
realise-
Well,
we'll-
in
you have to
fairness, it's
realise-
only been like a week.
yeah.
Yeah.
This thing
Not even that. 2
takes
days.
a while to organise.
Yeah.
This kind of campaign takes months to really get going.
I was going to say I would laugh my ass off if this announcement ends up being the thing that costs Bill Shorten any shot at the prime ministership. I would laugh if this is the one that kills it. Just because there are so many worse things that he promised.
No, he could drop it and he could keep going.
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
who
don't-
knows? Who knows? Who knows? If
You
the
could be
sustain-
right, but
Yeah, if the sustained campaign starts, right?
yeah.
It's technically Malcolm Turnbull's prerogative.
Sure.
Malcolm Turnbull going, oh shit, he picked a fight with the Boomers. The Boomers are organising. He might call an election.
This is the thing, though. Turnbull picked a fight with the Boomers in the last election. He did
Yeah.
the same thing by raising taxes on self-managed super fund retirees. So
And
now
they're hit with the banking
and this
levy
is
against the
probably
rental.
what Shorten is calculating. It's like, well, the Liberals have stabbed them in the back. I think we can get to stab them in the back now too, and it's not like they're going to be rushing back to the Liberal Party that just stabbed them in the back anyway. I mean,
possibly.
If you,
to some
if, by the
extent
way,
they
if you
will, but
if you
your
are a
pick will be
boomer,
down.
if you are a boomer and you happen to like your money,
Mm.
and I know you probably do, you should probably consider the LDP. Just a quick plug out there.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Democrats are the only political party out there that has consistently opposed all of these proposed changes, tax increases on self-managed super fund retirees, and indeed on all retirees. And they have a lovely tax policy of a flat 20% income tax rate. Isn't that amazing? For all. They'll cut taxes for everyone, and then we will all live in nirvana. So, vote Liberal Democrat. I'm a Liberal Democrat member, full disclosure.
Yes.
I'm not. I just like to wear the pom-poms and cheerlead.
Now, speaking of treachery, let's pivot to Putin. So on Sunday, there was an attack. Basically, Russia likes killing off people in other countries, like Russian dissidents and ex-Russians. And there was an attack on a former spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter. They were having a meeting in a cafe or something, and allegedly, some sort of Russian agent unleashed a nerve agent on them. They're in a stable but serious condition, so they might still live. But this is sort of one more instance of Russia, attacking people in other countries. You've got the former Ukrainian president, Viktor Yushchenko, who was hit with some sort of radioactive agent that disfigured him. There's a number of, over the years, the Russians have been pretty active, even after the Cold War, of trying to knock people off.
They're both critically injured, apparently. They're not dead yet.
No, they're not dead yet.
We should. They're in hospital.
Yes. And Theresa
hopefully
May,
they recover.
rushing to the moral high ground, has demanded an explanation from a government which never explains anything. And apparently Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, says Britain is preparing to take commensurate but robust action, whatever that means.
Oh, good lord.
Commensurate but robust action.
Which basically means they
sorry
could
to
expel the
laugh.
diplomats, which I'm sure Putin's devastated by.
Really?
I'm sorry.
I'm just like I honestly think that sounds like what a British person thinks that a librarian wants to hear if you're trying to pick him up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work there, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't work on the international stage. By the way, can I just quote Putin, because this is amazing. This is what Putin said before
Amazing
the
in a
attack.
terrifying way, we should point out.
Oh, it purges on coquettishness.
When did he say it?
So this was 4 weeks before this incident.
Yeah.
Traitors will kick the bucket. Trust me, these people betrayed their friends, their brothers in arms. Whatever they got in exchange for it, those 30 pieces of silver they were given, they will choke on them. How? I know. I'm just there going like, Putin, the ball's on you. And this reminds me of that conversation. Which presidential election was it? It was just like, I've looked at Putin in the face, and in his eyes, I saw the letters KGB. And my reaction to that was, I can imagine Putin laser tattooing KGB into his eyes. So, just to give you an idea about how much of a badass Putin is. So yeah, he's actually running out there making these threats.
I personally wouldn't call it badass promising to murder people overseas, but you can think of it that way. I think it's more kind of horrifying.
Look, under normal circumstances, you would just call him a mafia hitman. Sorry, not a mafia hitman. You'd call him a mafia mob boss.
Yeah.
However, he happens to control $1 trillion economy, and
he's a very wealthy mob boss. He doesn't control $1 trillion economy. He controls a very large
government,
mob, which calls itself the Russian government.
Yes.
Yeah,
which
they're a
happens
bunch
to
of
control.
murderous psychos. They are no different from, from. Tony
By the way,
Soprano.
when I say no. By the way, when I say controls $1 trillion economy, that is the estimated value of Russia's oil reserves. So yeah, I'm pretty sure he controls $1 trillion economy.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so here's the question though. There's lots of ongoing belligerence around, like argy-bargy over Russia and the hacking and the foreign interference, and they're back in being the bad guys. What is the kind of?
Did they ever stop being the bad guys?
Well, maybe for a bit. I mean, there's. I mean, I think for a while China was kind of the big villain, and they kind of alternated.
China was the big villain by selling us cheap goods and forcing their own people to subsidize a higher standard of living in Western democratic nations.
That makes them evil. So here's the question.
I thank the Chinese, seriously.
What as libertarians what would be the libertarian response to this? Because this is a chemical weapons attack on a UK citizen in the UK. What's the proportion? If you say you're the British Prime Minister, what's the libertarian response that you think to this sort of thing?
I don't know about libertarian response, but I've worked with a lot of people that were cutting their teeth early in their careers during the Cold War, and I found out about this on the TV, and I remember the conversation we were having was back in the day, back during the heat of the Cold War. That's a funny statement. If something like this happened, it wasn't something you televised. It was something that you would then do a precision attack on the one of their spies that you knew about in your country, and you would basically kill them off and go, yeah, see how you killed that defector? We just killed the spy because that defector told us. Right? It would be like a way of homage back to them, going like, yeah, you got your spy, we got yours, now back off.
Right.
Now, we've spent the better part of 30 years fighting Middle Eastern countries that really aren't capable of pulling this shit off. So we've kind of forgotten how to do this, which is unfortunate. But
I don't know.
Russia
I think the US is pretty
still
good
seems to be
at,
good at this.
Killing their enemies repeatedly with drones. I think they've got that one down to a fine art.
Well, when I see the US droning people in Russian streets, I will accept that as a valid form of dealing with Russian
This
spies.
is incredibly grim humor, ladies and gentlemen. This is dark humor that we're just going, well, wow, this is so dark.
I know.
Can we try to
As funny as that dark humor is, I know that we've got conservative listeners, and at least one of them has a raging heart on right now.
Yeah, it's true. Good point. Well, there was a discussion today about, the virtue of torture, like people basically arguing for the virtue of torture in the Australian Libertarian Forum. So yes, I suspect there are people who get a bit of a chubby. Really,
Okay.
The situation we have is actually incredibly precarious in terms of war with Russia, just because of geopolitics. So, I remember reading, I think it was last year, an article going into, people in Estonia who are genuinely afraid of Russian invasion. Now, the thing is, if Russia were to invade as part of their ongoing sort of belligerence on their borders, you think about Ukraine, essentially half of Ukraine just kind of vanished into Russia, using Russian troops. We're pledged to defend Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They're all on the Russian border. NATO's expanded quite aggressively since the end of the Cold War, and if the Russians attack them, we are, Section 5 or Article 5 says we must defend them no matter what. We were automatically dragged into a war. I mean, you think about the Middle East. It's not hard.
That's
to
an interesting
a scenario where Turkey and Syria get into it in the Middle East, which involves Russia, then it involves us, and then we're all running off to the races with World War III.
That's an interesting perspective, because while Russia still has a land capacity to threaten their neighbors and things like that, in terms of military, if you read military magazines and things like that, now you can never really know the true strength of military forces, right, until they're actually tested in war. But you can see by what they're willing to display, right, you can sort of ascertain a guess as to exactly what the capability of that country is, right? So in the case of the United States, they have the ability to launch a war, total war on a country anywhere on the planet within 48 hours. That's a tested capability that the United States has. Russia can barely attack Georgia, right? That build up for Georgia took 3.5 weeks to get that logistics into play, right? So the tested strength of Russia against their neighbors is quite feeble in comparison to any Western democracy. And by Western democracy, I mean United States. I mean the coalition of the willing, right? We had, largely thanks to US logistics, we had forces out in Afghanistan within 72 hours out there and fighting. Sure. We had fleets deployed within a week, right? We had full literal and air superiority within the first 72. Sorry, we had complete superiority of all land, sea, and air within the first week of combat. We had complete air superiority within 48 hours, and we had complete land superiority in 72, right? That is a tested allied forces capability, right? Russia took 3 weeks to do a logistical build-up against Georgia. So anyone who's talking about the prospect of war, I don't think Russia wants conventional war, and they've stated several times their first move is to go to their nuclear first strike option. So they've been banking on nuclear weapons for a long time. Russia doesn't want a war just as much as we don't, because of that nuclear aspect.
Sure, but in 1914, when the Archduke of Austria, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, had a grenade thrown into his face.
Yeah.
These small things can cascade into large conflicts.
They can, and we're largely lucky in that scenario, because we did learn from that. The alliances aren't as automatic as they were back then, right? So even though there's a treaty, so even though there's a treaty that says we must defend them, what you will find is that some discussion will take place between the two countries, and they'll try and settle it in a diplomatic way before they run to war. At least that's been, and the example I can give for that is Ukraine with Crimea, and Georgia with South Ossetia, So in both situations, they're technically countries the US has these same treaties with. We didn't go to war on either of them. There are currently diplomatic solutions in play for both those situations.
Yeah, I don't think Georgia is part of NATO though.
Georgia's not part of NATO, but Georgia is part of the the Star Wars missile project.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that amounts to a military assurance from the United States, though, that the United States will protect Georgia, the Star Wars missile project.
I thought it granted certain assurances. I mean, they've stuck missiles there.
I'm just saying I'm not sure.
I'd imagine the US wants to protect its missile assets.
I would hope so. And you might be quite right.
Sorry, I just realised that Turkey's part of NATO.
Yes, Turkey is part of NATO.
Yeah, so if Syria gets into it with Turkey...
that's another one. So the Turkey shot down those 2 Russian jets. Didn't result in World War III, even though technically that's an act of aggression. Sorry, an act of war.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, like,
but do you really want to bet on Erdogan's stability and willingness to, be nice to the Russians?
But this is the thing: no one is anymore.
No one banks on any of this.
NATO, as far as Turkey's membership is concerned, NATO is dead. Okay, Turkey is a member on paper. Anything that Turkey does at this point, Erdogan is regarded by the foreign policy establishment of every Western country as off the rails. The only reason I think that he hasn't been expelled is because it would take too much time and effort and cause bad press. But at this point, everyone has dismissed Erdogan.
Well, I don't know who everyone is, and the US have done dumber things.
That's my impression.
Yeah, so,
my impression is that Erdogan has been written off.
Okay, well,
I can only read, the foreign policy journals that the foreign policy bureaucrats read, and assume that they're reading the same journals and coming to the same conclusions. But
if that was the case,
they write in those same foreign policy journals. Those are the foreign policy journals that affect their thinking. If there's any guide or measure to what they're thinking, it's that.
So if Turkey goes to invoke Article 5 and everybody says, no, we don't give a crap, I think that's going to have much bigger implications for the alliance, which I don't necessarily think is a problem. I think NATO should be
if
done
he
with.
tries to invoke it. If he tries to invoke it, I think Turkey would be expelled from NATO.
Okay,
if it's just over Russia or something over Turkey and Syria, they won't even refer to that. They'll just say it's not a democracy anymore or something. Okay. They won't even get into the. I think the merits of the dispute. They'll just say, it's not a democracy.
Actually, I think it'll largely depend on how the US moves. So Turkey's involvement in NATO was only there to offset Russian influence in the region anyway. So if America still values Turkey's involvement, then Turkey will stay in, and there'll be some push to defend them. I think
there won't be a push to defend them against Russia, though. There will be
to be fair, they're not.
That's the whole point of NATO.
Yeah, I was just like,
it's not like
who can they possibly defend against?
We're talking about the Russian intervention in Syria and the Turkish intervention in Syria, and
no. So over that, nothing will happen.
That hasn't happened, and nothing. That's my point.
Yeah.
Over that, nothing will happen.
No. So
it would have happened by now.
So I agree with you.
Russian invasion of Turkey or something. Well, it's a pure hypothetical. It won't happen. There's no point raising it.
I don't know about
that. I think that's the hypothetical Lee was talking about, and I'm just like, I'm pretty sure if there is an invasion of Turkey itself by Russia, then we're talking a different situation.
But we're so far removed from it that I would say, in geopolitical terms, whatever, we're so far removed that it's hard to speak to. It's hard to say what the United States would do because it's so far outside of current.
I don't think it is. It is not hard to imagine a scenario where we end up going to war with Russia. because of all the
over
the-
Turkey. Because
Over-
Russia is
yeah,
invading Turkey.
To be perfectly honest, the
Oh,
way I've seen the Russian military behave with conventional wars against its neighbors recently, neighbors that are far weaker than it, the way that we've seen them behave with them recently, I don't.
That they're in no shape to fight Turkey.
I
which
don't.
has
Yeah,
they're in
yeah,
no shape.
I don't think they're in shape to fight Turkey, let alone Ukraine. Right? I'm just like, they're not. You are talking about a country whose logistical capability has languished since the fall of the Union. I mean, they aren't in a good position to fight. They need to do a full modernization and revitalization of their military forces, and that's
Okay,
years out.
Okay, so here's the thing, though. This will be my final comment that you guys can make a comment and we'll wrap up because we're running out of time. So here's my thing. The way politics works is not purely rational. The way these things play out is not purely like, okay, this is what makes sense. It's all in the heat of the moment. It's all politics. It's all internal politics as well. So, you know, and also like, you know, so like what we think? Oh, you know, if Russia invades Turkey, Russia's not going to invade Turkey, but something happens, some sort of clash, some sort of incident that triggers Turkey saying, "I want this invoked." Donald Trump, who I wouldn't want to place a bet that he's going to say no, goes on Twitter, says, "Yes, we will defend Turkey." It's not, you know, that's not completely out of the realms of possibility. Now, okay, Russia fighting its neighbors, less great, but do you really, I mean, like, fighting Russia in their own territory is not going to be an easy thing. It's going to be incredibly deadly, and as you guys have already said, Russia's got nukes, and they're willing to use them. So, you know, and so, yes, it does. None of it makes sense. But the reality of how the world works is the world does not run on making sense. War does not run on making sense. There's nothing sensible about the Afghanistan war. There's nothing sensible about the Iraq war, and yet we're still fighting them.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
figures and Z, you guys
true.
can wrap up.
I was just going to say, the caveat on that first strike, and this is why mutually assured destruction worked and why the Cold War was hotspots around the world, was that the US and Russia have an agreement for this thing, that it's only if you land on their respective homelands. If you attempt a conventional war on their respective homelands, then that nuclear thing becomes a first strike option. But what's more likely to happen is in a war with Russia is hotspots, right? Yeah. And I'm saying, like, you know, hey, Ukraine will be a hotspot. Turkey might end up being a hotspot, and Ossetia might be Georgia might end up being a hotspot, and there'll be hotspots for conventional wars where this is actually played out. Effectively, Cold War Mark II. I don't think you'll see direct war with Russia. There's not going to be direct wars between US and the two main superpowers.
I mean, I put it this way, like, you know, you look at the way the US went about, like, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which essentially was JFK being the biggest dickhead he possibly could to the Russians just because he could and just because he wanted to.
And even then, there was no war between the Americans.
Yeah, because thankfully Khrushchev, like, decided not to go to war with them. But, like, that's not necessarily, you know, like, none of these things need to play out that way a second time round. That's you know, and Turkey is in a position where they could invade independently of the US. You know, it's not like it's so far for them to get across, like, the Black Sea to go chasing after the naval base in the Black Sea.
It's not going to happen. They're not going to invade Russia.
Considering the stakes,
they're not going to do it.
You know, even if it's a 1%
he's barely able to control his own country. How's he getting the backing to actually invade another country?
Because
Turkey's
foreign wars
biggest
have never been launched
threat,
to support
Erdogan's biggest threat
politics?
is the army, and he's sending the army to invade people. I just don't know. I mean,
I can't imagine that happening.
I just don't know. I know what you're saying, that you know, things are unpredictable. I agree. I mean, and I agree that people aren't rational, and I agree that there's no rational reason to still be in Afghanistan. If you look at the Soviet Union's initial invasion of Afghanistan, you've got to wonder why they did it. Yes. And one reason that has been put to me is just that they did it because of in pure mindless inertia. Well, they had no rationale at all.
You know that the natural gas line goes through Afghanistan to Europe, right?
That's possible too. There you are. There's a reason. So, look, I guess I'm a little wary of making predictions about who will and won't go to war. I think, for the most part, within Western Europe, countries have not gone to war, and for the most part, outside of limited Eastern European conflicts, where there is strong Russian nationalist sentiment amongst some parts of the community, because there was in Ukraine, I should mention, strong Russian nationalist sentiment, like it or not. Outside of those areas, I don't think that the Russian military is capable of going to war with anyone, frankly. It's a paper-thin force made up of unmotivated soldiers and a tin pot army that can hardly handle itself, let alone another foreign force worth its anything. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. On that note, so thanks everybody for listening and watching us. We're on iTunes, we're on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back again next week.